Okay, got it. Whatever.
That's fine. You leave that in the background.
And connected to Wi-Fi and stuff. Why didn't you disconnect the comment from YouTube?
Like disconnect the phone. Yeah. I'll do that.
Okay. So alive. So there's 24 participants already.
Okay, good afternoon to all the CEOs around the table, to all of you who are joining us online for this event, really where we are going to launch the integrated energy report that is the first integrated report that has been completed as part of the NBI BUSA BCG Just Transitions Pathway work. By way of introduction, firstly, my name is Joanne Yawich. I'm going to shortly ask everybody around the table to introduce themselves. And we are looking forward to, I think, firstly to a presentation of the work that we've done, and then to the responses and the thoughts of the CEOs, not only on the report, but really on the issues related to their approach to South Africa's energy future. And thank you very all for being here today. We know how busy you all are, and we really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to be here. Just before we start, we have three apologies. The first is from the CEO of Eskom, who, as we know, is a very pressurized person. And at short notice, he was called away for an emergency and has asked that Mandy Rambros over there makes the comments that he was going to make. So welcome, Mandy. Then the CEO of the IDC is unable to join us today, and we will also try and reflect some of the issues that he wanted to speak to. And lastly, the CEO of the Chemical and Allied Industries Association is ill. So maybe just by way of apologies. The way today's agenda will unfold is we'll do a round of introductions in a few minutes. Then I'm going to hand over to Luca Chamontet from BCG to take us through a summary of the report. And following that, we'll have a moderated panel discussion, which I will chair. We will then close, give an opportunity, if we've got enough time, for further comments from the panel, and then we'll close the session at 3 o'clock. Maybe to say I've been very nervous about this event, because to try and keep such an august round table to a 4-minute contribution each is a bit intimidating, but I'm sure I have your permission to keep us to time and to ensure that we do finish at 3 o'clock exactly. So with that, could I ask if we could start with a round of introductions?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nyimpini Mabunda. I'm the CEO of GE at Southern Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Taelo Mojapilu, and I'm the CEO of BP Southern Africa. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Leila Fourie, the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Crispian Olver. I'm the Executive Director for the Presidential Climate Commission.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luca Chamontet, MD and partner at BCG in South Africa, leading our work on climate and just transition across Africa.
Thank you. And as I said, I am Joanne Yawich from the NPI.
Hi, Kes Kvadia, CEO at Business Unity South Africa and Chair at National Business Unity.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fleetwood Grobler. I'm the President and CEO of Sasol.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am the outgoing CEO of Exxaro Resources.
Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Nolita Fakude, and I'm the chairperson of Anglo-American in South Africa. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Njombo Lekula. I'm the MD of PPC Cement, RSA and Botswana.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Joan said, I'm not Andre de Ruyter. There's just a slight height difference, but his apologies. He had an emergency he had to deal with. My name is Mandy Rambaras. I'm a general manager in Andre's office, managing the Just Energy Transition work. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Theo Boshoff, the CEO of AgBiz, the Agricultural Business Chamber.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to now hand over to Luca to very briefly set the scene by talking about the work we've done and the conclusions of that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. And before I share the key findings from the report that we are releasing today, I wanted to thank you all. We're very happy to host you here in our office. It is the first time that we have a CEO meeting in person. We had several ones over the past 2 years, but this is the first time that we all meet in person. So very happy with that. So maybe just a quick background about the report that we are publishing today. It is the very first integrated report. Before that, we've published a number of sector-based reports, but this is the first time that we bring things together, focusing on the energy transformation that the country needs to do. And the report is relatively concise. We try to make it easy to read, but it is based on 2 years of work. Extensive modeling using world-class software Plexos for the energy system. We also interacted with more than 200 stakeholders. We've conducted more than 400 hours of workshop. So this is really the most comprehensive study in the country on the energy system and the most extensively socialized across key stakeholders among academia, government, and private sector. So this is a bit for the context. I won't go through all the key findings, but I wanted to share a few of them, but as a basis for the roundtable discussion we will have in a few minutes. The first message that I wanted to convey is that while getting to net zero is very difficult, it is very expensive, particularly for hardest to abate sectors like cement, for example. There are 60% of the total emissions that we can eliminate by switching to a renewables-based power system, by the combination of electrification and switching from a coal-based power system into a renewables-based power system. And the additional good news here is that it is economically viable. We can do that without an increase in the cost of power. And why is that? It's because renewables have become a lot more affordable, and the load factors in South Africa are world-class, and we have also an excellent mix of wind and solar. So that's sort of the positive thing. Now we have lots of challenges, and the very first, I would say, main challenge is time. If we look at the scale of what we need to build over the next 30 years or less than 30 years now, it is absolutely massive. If we put this into numbers, we're talking about 7 gigawatt of renewables capacity to be built every year in the next 10 years. And that numbers goes up to 10 gigawatt per year in the remaining 20 years. Just to put that in perspective, it is more every year what needs to be built than what we've built over the last 10 years. So we're talking about a more than 10x acceleration. So that's the first key challenge. Now, how do we get to the speed that we need in this journey? The second major challenge that we wanted to highlight is related to the other infrastructure that is required to make a renewables-based power system work. It's not just about generation. We need the adequate grid infrastructure and capacity, and we also need the infrastructure to manage intermittency and renewables, particularly storage capacity, as well as peaking capacity. So if we focus just on the grid capacity and look at what we have today, about 30 gigawatts of available grid capacity, mostly in Mpumalanga, will require some upgrade and some strengthening to be used. But that is a good basis where we can start plugging new generation. But it's not enough. Up to 2030, we will need 60 gigawatts. So that means that we still need to build an additional 30 gigawatt of capacity, particularly in the coastal areas where the available capacity is very low. And this is where we have most of the best renewable resources. So a lot of investment required in the grid. And here we're talking about I would say the hardware, the hard infrastructure. This study is about just transition. We also need to think about the software, the people side of things. It is a massive reconfiguration of the workforce, massive reskilling, migration of workforce. All of that needs to be done in a way that is socially just. And when we say socially just in South Africa, it can be quite different than in some other places. It doesn't mean maintaining the status quo in terms of jobs and income. It is about significantly improving from there. So these are the challenges that we have ahead of us. Now, if we put the consolidated picture of what it means for the energy mix, you can see here it is not an incremental change. It is a radical shift. And if we start from the left-hand side, you see here the power generation. We need to more than double the quantity of power in the next 30 years as a result of economic growth, but also electrification of the economy. So it's not just about replacing the coal system, it's about scaling it up significantly. Then moving to the right, we also need to substitute nearly all oil-based liquid fuels up to 2050, phase out entirely coal progressively, particularly in the last decade towards 2050. We need to increase gas as a peaking technology in the next 10 to 20 years, but then decrease again towards 2050 and massively scale up renewables, hydrogen, and its derivatives. If we put this into money, to numbers, we're talking about overall 6 trillion rands of investments in the next 30 years. 1.2 trillion rands in the first decade. So this is a lot of money. Half of it will have to go into the power transition. And if we look at, for example, what we've secured today, we are not there. The $8.5 billion secured at the COP26 is really good news and very encouraging, but it's still far from the overall amounts that are required to make this work. And before I hand over to Joanne to facilitate the roundtable, I just wanted to share a few key takeaways from this study as I see it. The first one is it's big, it's difficult, but we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. We must do it, and we must be successful. Otherwise, it is our ability to industrialize the country, it is our ability to develop globally competitive industries that is at stake. So we must succeed in this. It is key to the just transition. The second one, which is the positive message, is that 60% of the emissions that we need to remove can be done in an economically viable way. It is difficult in its coordination, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of reconfiguration of things, but it is economically viable. The third one is we will not be able to do this with incremental measures. This is a major step up. It needs to be elevated as a national priority, and it needs to mobilize everyone. It is nothing like incremental change. And I wanted to basically finish with this word of this importance of coordination, that the sum of individual actions, even bold ones, will not get us there. We need cooperation, we need integrated policies, we need collaboration between private sector and public sector. In other words, we need a strong cooperation to make this work.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luca. We are now going to move into the roundtable panel discussion. And I think that where we'll start, in fact, is with you, Mandy, to really talk about how, in the context of the current energy security crisis that we're facing, whether or not there's a trade-off between decarbonization and energy security. And if there is, how does that play out? And if there isn't, how do we think about it? And then to talk really about some of the quick wins that need to be pursued now, and what, from your perspective, are the enabling factors that need to be put in place.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you, Luca, for that presentation. I think actually he said it all in that presentation in answering that question. But the energy crisis that we are currently in, and we have been in for many, many years, it's not new, and the transition are actually complementary and not contradictory, contrary to what we're seeing a lot in the media. We've been saying for a number of years that we need to add 4 to 6 gigawatts of capacity to the system. And I think in the study you can see you mentioned 7 gigawatts now that we need to add. So that number is cumulative. It's growing. So the less time we take, or the more time we take to add capacity to the grid, the higher that number is going to get. So they're not contradictory. They're complementary, because for a number of reasons. So even if you were completely environmentally agnostic, at the moment the quickest and the cheapest capacity you can put on the grid is renewables. Anything else. So that we're talking 18 to 24 months. That's the quickest we can do. And we've got grid capacity availability, like Luca showed in that graph as well. So we have about 13 gigawatts of grid available immediately that we can add capacity to the grid. So adding renewables makes complete sense. It will add capacity to the grid, albeit at lower capacity factors than we currently have, which means we need to overbuild renewables. We need to build as much as we can. Secondly, it gives us headroom as Eskom to do maintenance on plant that we will have running post 2035. So we have a strategy to shut down 22 gigawatts of coal by 2035. And what we need is the headroom to maintain those 6 plants that will be running beyond 2035, to get their availability factors up and to ensure that we can continue to provide that electricity into the grid as well. So there might be, when you asked me if there are some trade-offs, there might be a need for us to extend the dead stop dates for some of the plant that we currently have scheduled to shut down in the next 5 years. Camden, for example, should be shutting down in the next 5 years. We may have to extend that dead stop date as we build renewables on the system. And that's due to the gap. So it's not, it must not be confused with life extension. We're not extending the life of coal. So Eskom has been unequivocal about that. We will not invest in or extend the life of coal, but we might extend the dead stop date. So instead of shutting it down by 2025, we might shut it down by 2027, for example, to give us that extra headroom. But unmistakably, the quickest and the best thing we can do is add renewables to the grid as quickly as we can. That is the quick win. So in the last few weekends, we've been in a number of energy crisis meetings, and the same questions being asked is what are the quick wins? What can we do quickly? And I sound like a broken record, but it is adding capacity to the grid as quickly as possible. We've made land available in Mpumalanga. We went out to the market in April. We made land available to the private sector to lease land from us to build renewables. And that was oversubscribed by 3 times. So we've got 18 bidders that have been signed on, 1,800 megawatts without a PPA and without a government guarantee. I think that's very important to understand. There is so much appetite for investment in renewables in South Africa. So we will be going out on land leases again in the next couple of months. As the graph showed, we have grid capacity available. We're doing some land assessments. We will be able to go out soon. We made available 4,000 hectares. Like I said, it was oversubscribed, so we're going to go out with more land availability. And all I can say, and Lucas said it at the end, we can't solve this by ourselves. There has to be a collaboration for the private sector to get more involved, to go out at scale, invest in renewables, and offer gigawatt scale PPAs to these guys that want to invest, I think is the way to do it. So it's not one organization or one entity solving the problem, but all of us working collectively. So the land lease, the biggest win. We're also talking to government in these energy crisis roundtables around the regulatory barriers that need to be lifted. The 100 megawatt cap is arbitrary. Should we even have that cap? The registration process needs to be quicker. And fortunately, some of these things are being taken up. So DFFE, for example, is looking at ways to make EIAs easier for things like PVs. But there's a lot that we still need to do, and we still can work together to do on the advocacy side of these things. Thanks, Joe. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Mandy. I think that's a very encouraging message. Fleetwood, if I can move on to you, and I think both Luca and Mandy have now spoken about collaboration. And maybe if you could start off by talking about what do you think are the 3 key actions that the business sector broadly needs to take in relation to this issue at the moment?
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you also for the class-leading piece of work, and the report that we see is going out today. I think it's an excellent achievement. So I believe that 3 top actions that we need to take now and how it would be undertaken are as follows. We need to firstly embrace the transition and act with intent to achieve a sustainable and thriving South Africa. The evidence is clear. IPCC shows we are currently on a trajectory where SA will be disproportionately affected by climate change. We have already seen evidence of this in KZN floods, where communities and businesses are still feeling the effects of this devastating impact from this event. The great work of the NBI has shown us now that transitioning is possible while still delivering value today and into the future. More so, it has shown that inaction is worse for a fragile economy such as ours. In fact, we can create more jobs and have much higher growth pathways than we see today. It requires each and every one of us within business to take this work and internalize it and see where the risks and opportunities are to drive climate action. The second aspect is collaboration on the just transition. This transition cannot exacerbate the high levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality experienced today. And if leveraged appropriately, opportunities in the low carbon future can deliver a more sustainable and thriving South Africa. Ensuring a just transition so that our employees, our communities, and other stakeholders are not left behind is vital. However, facilitating the just transition cannot be undertaken by only one organization, but requires an ecosystem of stakeholders. To this end, Sasol recently set up a Just Transition Office to coordinate our efforts and collaborate with other stakeholders. The Energy Council is equally looking to bring like-minded businesses into a collaboration model to deliver economies of scale in just transition projects in areas most affected by this transition. We need more opportunities like these, I believe, to be seized and to be driven with intent. The third aspect is implementation of tangible projects, focusing on ramping up renewables and the development of green hydrogen. Renewable energy and green hydrogen are key opportunities for this country. With some of the best wind and solar endowments in the world, South Africa has the right ingredients to be a global green hydrogen player and a green energy champion. Establishing a pipeline of investable renewable energy and green hydrogen projects will be critical to catalyzing investments and the implementation of South Africa's just transition to net zero. As Sasol, we have done just that, having launched an RFP to procure 1.2 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. This is also in line with Eskom's call today to action for business to procure gigawatt scale PPAs. We're also playing a lead role in orchestrating South Africa's green hydrogen ecosystem and establishing a pipeline of investable projects across the hydrogen value chain. An example here is the multi-gigawatt Boegoebaai hydrogen export project in the Northern Cape, which we have currently under a pre-feasibility study status. I think I'll stop there, Jane.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Fleetwood. Maybe if I could just pick up on one point. I mean, I think you've stressed the need for scale, you've stressed the need for collaboration, you've stressed the need for, particularly in relation to the just transition, for collaboration in order to bring scale. But I think one of the questions, and particularly in relation to the kind of renewables pipeline that you're speaking to, is to really talk about and identify the support that would be needed to unlock those projects. So maybe if you could comment on that.
Yes, thanks, Joanne. We've given it quite a bit of thought, and I think we've crystallized, the enabling ecosystem, which will be critical to reach implementation stage of these projects. So let me touch on, in my view, 5 key priorities that can be addressed to create an enabling environment. So first of all, let me start with NERSA. And we know that NERSA has made huge progress for registering of projects less than 100 megawatt, but we have now make sure that we can now do the first projects in that category, but we need more of that. So we can't stop there. So for projects over 100 megawatt, this process is still slow in our opinion, given that NERSA requires a full PPA between the buyer and seller, which can delay overall project implementation and development timelines. This needs to be addressed, and I think the view would be here to accelerate the projects that is above that magnitude of 100 megawatt. So I think that's the first one. Secondly, the IRP. While implementing the current IRP, I think a revised IRP needs to be developed as a matter of urgency in line with our agreed decarbonization aspirations and the least cost pathway. This needs to be data-driven, technology agnostic, cost-effective, coupled with a practical and pragmatic approach to meet the country's needs. Thirdly, we also need to upgrade and balance our grid. We listened to Mandy and her point around the grid. So we've seen the studies, we've seen this on the report that we released today, that it needs to be strengthened as a matter of urgency to accommodate renewables at pace and scale needed for energy security and decarbonization. So areas like the Northern Cape, which have the best renewable energy resources, have stagnated, given the grid connection constraints, remembering that better wind and solar resources result in cheaper tariffs for the country. We should also be considering where the major bottlenecks in the transmission system are and what could be done to unlock further capacity. I'm sure Eskom has studied this in detail. A fourth aspect is licenses and permits for renewable and green hydrogen projects that should be prioritized and fast-tracked. This includes environmental, water, mining rights, agriculture consent, civil aviation, and many other approvals. Integrated licensing has been beneficial in other areas and must be pursued here as well. So the last aspect is really the access to green financing, really to enable this aspiration and pipeline of projects. It needs to be pointed out that this transition is not about flicking a switch and one day you are in a fossil fuel world and the next day you are in a fossil fuel free world. No, it will take time, especially recognizing the need for a just transition. We are fundamentally changing our business models, our feedstock, our dependencies, moving from independence rather to interdependence. This is not going to be easy and will require all hands on deck, and most importantly, it will require finance and lots of it. Green financing must be provided by the international development institutions and donors to fund ready-to-go catalytic projects for both the public and private sectors. Government is formalizing the allocation model for the $8.5 billion Just Transition Facility, which was launched at COP26 last year. But we all know that we need way more than this to undertake a complete redesign of our economy. We need to cooperate as business to support government, to attract international support by bringing forward more bankable projects for funding.
Thank you very much, and I think that leads me right on to Leila. And clearly, Leila, the issue of green finance is critical to enabling a just transition. I think recently you launched the Sustainability and Climate Disclosure Guidance, and really maybe if you could talk a little bit about both that and the role that it has to play in a financing environment and in these areas of concern, but also how business can play a role in terms of greater mobilization of green finance for South Africa, and I suppose deployment of it as well.
Yes, thanks very much, and Joanne. And I think maybe I'll just start with a slightly wider contextualization of the role of the financial sector as well as the JSE. And I think the financial system has a really crucial role to play in mobilizing investment and in catalyzing investment into the path of just transitioning to net zero. And the JSE is very much supportive of that process. We are very supportive of NBI's Just Transition Pathways project. And what's been really important in that sphere is it's got us thinking about the scale, as we saw the numbers put up earlier. At the same time, I'm also very conscious of the work in the public sector, and including particularly the National Treasury's work on financing the sustainable economy, and particularly the recent work that was done by the Presidential Climate Commission, along with the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team under Dan Manelli. So there is a very important and a great opportunity for public and private sector to start to work together. And the framework that we launched just recently was based on international precedent. I think what is critically important in all of our interaction with the UN and the various different global bodies is that the Northern Hemisphere and the first world countries are exclusively climate focused, and the just transition and the dynamics in South Africa relating to our social, the importance of developing the social side is crucial. And so the outcome of our new and what was very well welcomed disclosure framework was that we focused on E, S, and G. We weren't exclusively focused on E. And I think the importance there is that we want to avoid stranded assets. We want to ensure that the social dynamics within the country are front and center. We realize that there is a commercial incentive. It's not purely an emotive or an ethical issue. We've launched a number of new bonds relating to green and social, and within that, they've been our best performing bonds within the bond market. We've raised more than $10 billion in the past year under our sustainability bond framework. And those bonds have been oversubscribed by 3 to 4 times, indicating the focus of private sector and the focus of business on financing. And what's really crucial to underpin this is an appropriate standardized framework that's aligned with global precedent. So we're very pleased with this framework. We think it's the first step. And will certainly evolve as the methodology and the quantification and the disclosure becomes more sophisticated. Insofar as the connection between public and private sector goes, I think the most important thing here is capacity building. Private and public sector need to make sure that we are focused on skills building in the right technologies. So sustainable business lines that take us to net zero are going to require a new set of skills. And in order for us to avoid the dislocation that could happen in the workforce and unemployment that comes with those who have older skills, a genuine, connected, lined up whole of industry between public and private sector is required to ensure that we deal with the social dynamics.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And I think the JSE has done fabulous work over the last year. I think the guidance is incredibly helpful, and also read with things like the National Treasury's Green Taxonomy starts creating for South Africa a really world-class framework within which we can work. Nolita, if I could come to you now. And I think maybe to pick up on some of the things that Leila was alluding to, mining is clearly a sector that is being significantly disrupted by the energy transition as commodity value pools shift. And in your role both as chairman of Anglo in South Africa as well as the chairperson of Munkosa, you bring a great perspective in relation to how the sector is collaborating to decarbonize and ensure a just transition. And really, if you could talk a little bit about how mining is working to ensure just transition, and also what support is required?
Many thanks, Joanne. And again, I want to echo what my colleagues have already said, to congratulate the NBI and BCG for the great work that has gone ahead in putting this report together over the last 2 years. It's really helpful because you've managed to integrate all the perspectives from the different stakeholders. First, I want to really bring us back to the fact that we are talking about the just energy transition as part of this topic, but it's difficult to talk about just energy transition within the context of South Africa without thinking about the broader justice topic in terms of very much all of our transitions that we've seen, including the fourth industrial revolution, as well as skills revolution and many other revolutions before. So for us as an organization, both the Minerals Council, but as well as Anglo American, we are looking at this from a holistic perspective to see, one, how best could mining ensure that the decarbonization commitments that all of us are making are actually achieved in a way that will bring up that justice element for all of our operations and also for the industry at large. I'm sure most of us have heard the saying that if it's not grown, then it's mined. And it basically means then that even for the low carbon future that we're talking about, mining will still play a significant role in helping with the transition and also the decarbonization that we're talking to. However, we do acknowledge that that mining will have to be done in a sustainable manner. And for us, we are looking at various technologies that will enable for us to mine in a way that is sustainable, and that the technology covers just from an operational perspective, the efficiencies, making sure that you mine with less impact on the environment, including water usage, and water efficiency plays a key role for us in mining to make sure that we mine in a sustainable fashion. Also, energy efficiency is part of that process. And various technologies are being explored by different organizations, including Anglo American. We also acknowledge that the materials that are mined, copper, nickel, PGM groups, and even iron ore, are very much key in helping with the transition, whether they're talking about battery technology or even the solar PV system that we're talking to. Mining will still play a role, but as we know, the value chain and the supply chain has got to be green and also as sustainable as is required. So we are looking into those issues around clean coal even as part of our process. So I want to take away this myth that mining is a reluctant participant in the just energy transition or even the just transition process, because we see our role as quite significant and important. Secondly, the issue around how we make sure that the S within the ESG is actually also amplified, which is what Leila was talking to, is what we are looking at as the industry. The partnerships and collaborations with institutions of learning, of higher learning, are important. Research and development, as I have indicated, also is quite important. Within the Minerals Council for the last 3 years, we have been working with the CSIR through the Nelson Mandela Research Precinct to make sure that we work with labor to understand the future of work and also how mining will be impacted with this kind of transition, because also for us, technology also helps with safety and innovation. So we do use innovation and technology significantly to make sure that these transitions have a lesser impact on employees as well as communities as we continue to operate within communities. We are very aware of the fact that resources, mineral resources, belong to countries, they don't belong to companies. So it's important then that when we make decisions about resources, whether we use them or not use them, that we take into consideration country strategies around their commitment to social impact and also inclusion of the communities, especially host communities, as well as making sure that all stakeholders participate in a way that benefits them at the end of this process. So this work that has been done here really is going to be good to help shape for us also how we make sure and ensure that the transition is actually looking at all possible pathways that can be explored, and that we also manage the tension between the agency to transition, because currently in South Africa, we obviously have the energy crisis situation. But as we do that, we also need to make sure that even from new industries that are being developed, we also include all stakeholders within the South African landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I think a very comprehensive view on particularly the role of mining and the opportunities that a just transition offers for the mining industry is an absolutely fundamental underpinning of our economy. Mxolisi, if we can maybe move to talk a little bit more specifically in your case about, in particular, as one of the largest coal mining companies in the world, I think the impacts of the energy transition are obviously most immediate in your space. And maybe if you could talk, I think Exxaro has thought about this for a number of years and has developed, I think, some very innovative approaches, but also to talk about the critical actions you think business and government need to be taking jointly to ensure a just transition.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And again, let me echo my previous comments that have been made about this good work. And I think both Leila and also Sis Nolita here have laid a very good foundation about what I was also going to be talking to, because I'm part of that industry. So we do this work collaboratively as a sector, as a mining industry. So a lot of the work that Nolita is talking about is work that we are doing collectively as an industry. But I'm also very conscious, and I mean, this point has been really touched on this S part. And I think we talk about jobs being created, loss of jobs. But if I'm Dlamini and I'm sitting there and I'm hearing you talk about all these jobs, I don't understand what you're talking about. I can't relate to that. If I'm hearing Mandy saying that she wants to start shutting down Camden, or she's going to delay it by 2 years, what does that mean for me as Dlamini? Where am I in this shutdown? What happens to me? So for me, this becomes real, practical, day-to-day living issues for lots of millions of people, of which I think we tend to rightfully talk about critical aspects to make this transition, right? In terms of the capital and everything that needs to happen. But sometimes I don't think we pay enough attention on that part which impacts the day-to-day living of people and giving them the comfort that it is indeed going to be a just transition. So I think part of probably the work I would be saying to the NBI is good. I'm actually sort of leaving now, in terms of, but it's something that still consumes me in terms of, where I would like to see myself playing in the future, is really take this thing down to the lowest denominator. So that when we say we're going to bring in this new technology, Mandy, that side is closing a mine, okay? How are those communities getting impacted as we are bringing in new technologies in that area? What skills are going to be required? How are we going to even fund those requirements? Are these companies that are going to be building these new technologies are going to take a responsibility in taking sure that as they are getting these land leases available to them, what sort of jobs are they going to play? Are they going to create? And how are they going to ensure that the people in those areas are going to be ready to take up those jobs? Is it a 1-for-1 match in terms of no? And it's normally not that. So this is where we need to really start now getting to the belly of this beast. Because if we don't do that and we start, and people start feeling that, you know what, there is a lot of, whitewashing around this whole thing, or greenwashing around this whole thing. People are going to start getting very disillusioned. And you're not going to have, the issues of last year, June, we're not going to go away as long as people don't see that there is hope for them. So it's good work. I mean, I'm not going to repeat what has been said here, but I think there's just another dimension. We talk about the S, but we are very shallow on the S. We are very, very shallow on the S. We have everything about financing. We've got everything about the technical side, which is easy to grapple with. The S1 is going to be the next biggest challenge that I think we all need to really focus on, so that as we are bringing these things, we can map out saying by 2030, these are the new jobs, these are the types of skills that are going to be required. This is how we're going to do this training development. This is how we're going to redefine communities to be able to take up those up. So that's really what I would wish to say, Joanne, without really repeating what has already been said, which is the right things that are going to be required. But the S1 is one that worries me, because that's the time bomb that can actually negate everything that we are talking about here. And how does government and business work together? I think we already started that. We just have to just keep pushing and pulling and grabbing, and we're screaming at government if we have to, but we cannot do this thing on our own. They can't do it on their own. So we have to, through all these initiatives, I was talking to Kaz earlier on to say, you know what, we're still beating the same drumbeat we've been beating for the last few years with government, and we're going to continue beating it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope, Dr. Olver, when we come to you a bit later, that you're listening very carefully to these points that have been made. Tayalo, if I could come on to you to talk a little bit, I think about to talk about what the just transition means for BP, but I think in the context, in particular, of the changing energy mix. Many of the local refineries in our country are closing down and facing huge challenges. And really, I suppose the question is moving away from the electricity sector and onto energy more broadly. What do we need to do to drive climate action and mitigate the impacts of the energy transition?
Thank you, Joanne. I probably just want to start as well by echoing what everyone else has said about the report. I think it's a great piece of work that will help us move forward, given the various input and different stakeholders that have been engaged. Really great work over the last 2 years. But I think it's also important to recognize that we all need to get various stakeholders around the table to embrace the energy transition. I think business has done great work, but we obviously still have to do a lot of work to bring other partners such as civil society as well as labor to the party to really recognize, to get them to start understanding how the just transition plays out. We see the just energy transition as a tool that one could use for social mobility. Leila just earlier on spoke about the green financing. Indeed, I mean, many of the refineries have shut down. Quite a lot of them have come of age. And globally, what you do find is the liquid fuels industry is also transitioning. And we are not immune to the decisions of governments in the UK as well as EU that are really making headway in terms of green mobility. And as we move away from the electricity sector, we also do know that many of our manufacturers, the OEMs, which are the vehicle manufacturers, do supply Europe, and many of their vehicles would have to be green mobility, and we cannot be isolated from that. So for us, policy certainty is probably the most critical element that we need to grapple and get our heads around. And when I say policy certainty, it really has to be an integrated policy approach. So if I were to give you an example, when we talk about enabling green mobility, we've got to make sure that the policies around energy are very clear, because we cannot launch EVs in an energy crisis because you're defeating the purpose. The policies around labor are very clear, because the value chain is changing. And back to what Mxolisi was talking about, skills development, how are we going to make sure that labor really understands what it means when you no longer have vehicles operating on liquid fuels and are now operating on a different energy source, and where do the jobs come from? In the absence of that integrated policy, it becomes very challenging to get it off the ground. And when you talk about transport as well, in the transport sector, your OEMs are making headway on electric vehicles. However, what you do find is it is still quite prohibitive in South Africa because of the premiums that are associated with it. In order for us to make headway on green mobility, we've got to make sure that we're able to, have green energy sources at scale. And this is why it's important for it to all be integrated. And we really would like to work with the different stakeholders to ensure that we start making good progress. In terms of the just energy transition, when it comes to how employees understand what needs to happen, many have spoken about skills development, but I think more importantly is really for people to understand that those that actually have the resources and means, how do we start bringing the rest of society along? Because in the absence of that, what you run the risk of it being more of a talk shop per se, without us moving forward, because the reality is the people that have the less resources actually determine how your country moves forward, because they will either make it happen or either frustrate the process. And it's very important that we bring everybody along.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I think that that last point is really important, that if people aren't with you, they are often against you, and that means that you can't move. And I think in that context, what I think Nolita and Mxolisi and yourself have spoken about in terms of opportunity is what I want to now move on to and ask Nyimpini to come in, and really to look at some of the issues around the development of new green industries, to look at the issues around skills development, how we make it happen, to look at the question around localization. And we're aware that General Electric has been very deeply involved in driving both localization and skills development in South Africa in the past. And how do you think that the work that individual companies are doing, including yourself, can be scaled by collaboration within business and around value chains?
Thank you very much. And at the risk of being a broken record, is to also really congratulate the team for the fantastic work. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to have been part of this work in the last 2 years or so. And the outcome speaks for itself. I am at a personal level particularly proud because I'm an alumni of BCG. And it's great to be back in this office. It's great to be back home. And it's good to see the organization continuing to produce great work. Joanne, you're right about our experience. Of course, GE has been involved in huge infrastructure projects in the power sector, but also in the transportation sector, working alongside our customers like Eskom, Sasol, and Transnet, and with a high degree of localization. And over the years, we've learned a lot around what works in driving skill development and localization. And I think I'm using that to reflect what I think we need to do as industries, as private sector going forward. And for me, there's 4 things. I think the first one is to really go back to the foundation or the grassroots, because what is quite clear is that our basic education and schooling system is not producing the level of competency that we need. If you look at your STEM pass rate and you look at people who start grade 1 versus those who complete matric, I think many of us have been investing at the university level. We've been going to technical and technical, but we need to intervene at a high school level. And I think collectively we need to think about how we do that, because unless you do that, the pipeline that's coming into university is already of poor quality. And if you have an input that is already poor, then you don't have the output that you want. And to this extent, I'm really pleased about GE's Next Engineer program. We announced earlier this year, which is an investment of $2.5 million to train particularly 14 to 16-year-olds. And we're aiming to reach 5,000 and to become engineers and people who haven't been previously exposed to that. We need to look at programs like that and do it at scale for me. The second part, though, is that there is some available skill. There is a mismatch of skill that we have in the market versus the skill we require. And I think then we need to not just reskill, but do conversion. And we have experience with some of this conversion. I remember at some point when we had shortage of CAs, and we'll take mathematics teachers and we put them in conversion courses. Recently, I had an experience when I was at Vodacom where we had huge shortage of data scientists, and we're converting CAs and engineers into data scientists. And that is a quicker way of doing that. I think at some point medicine did that as well. And we need to think about what are the base skills that people have, and what can we put on top to drive that conversion. And specifically, then we need to therefore not ignore to use Nkolisi's example of Dlamini. And Dlamini, who's a coal miner, and Dlamini, who's working in an Eskom power station that is going to be closed. What skill base do they have? And on top of that, what conversion training can you do? And I think we need to do that at an ecosystem level. I think for me, that's quite important. And this is a very topical issue that I agree with Nkolisi, that we need to really go deeper and talk about it. Last week, I had the pleasure of, in my capacity as the chairperson of US-South Africa Business Council, through the South Africa Embassy in Washington, we had an Invest in Mpumalanga roundtable with the Mpumalanga Premier and her team. And it was quite tough because Mpumalanga as an economy relies a lot on coal and the coal jobs and all of that, to talk to them about transition. And therefore, what does it mean for that economy? So you can imagine, even if it's painful at that level, when you now, because they said Mpumalanga is accountable for about 80% of generated energy currently. Now you take it to Dlamini, and I'm also biased again because I happen to be the son of Mpumalanga, having been born and brought up in Bushbuckridge. I've got vested interest. So for me, I think we need to think about the reskilling and how do we train and do that. And it is possible. Just, I know I'm giving a lot of examples, but I really like to make things practical. In 2020, we had a crisis at GE. One of the big divisions we have is obviously aircraft engines. We supply 7 out of 10 aircraft engines today, and the aircrafts were grounded everywhere. And suddenly, no services, nothing, because you know the hangars are closed. But what happened is that the healthcare division had huge demand for COVID-related stuff, including ventilators, and we supplied in 3 months what was 5-year demand normally of ventilators. We didn't have people to make that. We then retrained technicians who were making aircraft engines and fixing engines in 2 months, and they were making ventilators in a makeshift factory. So that is possible, and I think we just need to think creatively. The next one for me is about scale, and Lucas talked about this, to say we're looking to build per year what we've built in 10 years, 10x, right? And we don't have a very good record on execution. at scale. I mean, even the World Cup stadiums were nearly late. I mean, talk about any other infrastructure project. So we need to find ways to reskill at scale and build capacity at scale. And I think that's where we need to leverage technology. We need to think about what can we do with video platforms, what can we do with AI technology, what can we do with leveraging the 4IR to train at scale. I mean, the government has allocated extra spectrum today, meaning that the cost of data and devices should come down. How do we leverage that to really drive things at scale? Because we don't have enough universities, we don't have enough technicons, we don't have enough CETAs. What else can we do to augment that? So I think we need to be creative. And then lastly, it's retention schemes. We lose far too many people that we've trained. I was talking to some people in executive search and just search in general. They're saying that they have never been busier. And the sad thing is that it's not that there's more jobs, but they are replacing people who are leaving the country. And these are skilled engineers, skilled people who are going elsewhere. So we need to have an ecosystem to say, after a project is finished, where else can they go? And I think as industries, we need to look at all of the infrastructure demand and have that cooperation so that the skill can rotate, can stay here. But we also have to be creative on some of the retention schemes, because I think it's going to be all about skill, skill, skill. We need not be oblivious to the fact that the skill that we're developing and that we want, the rest of the world wants as well. And they come in with very aggressive packages. There's highest number of vacancies in the US, in Dubai, wherever. So we're competing globally with these markets who are looking for our people. So if we don't retain them, it's going to be a problem. I mean, I can tell you from a GE side, the demand for renewable energy around the world, it's over the top. And therefore, the people that we train are the same people that Europe will want. If we don't retain them, they are gone, because the euro and the dollar is much more attractive than the rand. So we need to think creatively. It's going to be competitive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I think it picks up on what Fleetwood was talking about in terms of collaboration and the points that were made about the mining industry. But I do love this notion of conversion, because I think that as opposed to talking about reskilling or redeployment, what it does talk about is the base level skills that people have, even if they aren't a very specific technical skill, and therefore the opportunity to see the potential in people to be doing different things. And I think that in this context, that is something that is really important in terms of also building support and finding a way to think about what is required, so that it opens up opportunities for people and doesn't close them down. So thank you very much for that contribution. And Njombo, if I can come on to you, and I think that cement is sitting with a really difficult problem. Like steel, it is one of the most difficult sectors to decarbonize. It's not a South African problem. It is a problem right across the world. And so maybe to ask what, and clearly we have an interest in South Africa, particularly if we want to localize in retaining our heavy industry and retaining our cement and steel industries and growing them. And so what support do you think is needed for the hard to abate sectors like yours to decarbonize, and how do you work with others around that?
Thanks, Joanne. I think you're very correct. It's hard to abate, but it's not impossible. And we believe that it's going to take time. So as PPC last year, around November, we launched our decarbonization roadmap. And we kept being asked, why did you say 2030 and not 2050? And I said, well, I won't be there after 2030. So I can't commit on something that I cannot really demonstrate delivery on. And basically what we said is we need to be practical and say there are steps in terms of where we're going. By its very nature, limestone, we actually take it off the ground and we drive off 34% of the CO2. And that's why it becomes very difficult to abate. However, there are other elements in the processes, and that's why when we were talking about industrial collaboration, the collaboration between government and business, and looking at how we can change the situation. We are also a very intense energy user, fossil fuels in terms of coal, and we can start looking at replacement. It's been done all over the world. Things like your tires, used tires, we can use those for energy generation. The whole concept of zero waste to landfill concept, all over the world, there is like substitution of this fossil fuel to about 40 to 60%, which is being used in the cement industry. It's the best incinerator you can actually ever find. But in South Africa, the biggest issue that we have is that legislation does not talk the same language in terms of like this zero to waste. So when we talk about zero to waste, zero to landfill waste, we don't support it with the accompanying legislation. We've got tires all over, and if you drive on the N4, there's lots of farms that the land is occupied with those tires. But actually the legislation in terms of taking those and encouraging recycling or actually processing of those tires for energy has not come forth. So that's the one area that we should be looking at and say, how do we take our waste and convert in terms of trying to improve the element of decarbonization. The other aspect is that within the government and within the business, let's take Eskom produces a lot of ash, and some of that ash we actually utilize in extending our product and then reduce the amount of limestone that we require in producing the cement. So it is all about collaborating in understanding that as a business, we can't operate as alone and say we'll solve the decarbonization issue. All the elements and all the businesses within the sector needs to look and say, how can I be able to borrow from one to be able to collectively solve the problem?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think this issue of, in particular, the zero waste to landfill in relation to your industry has been a long-standing debate with government, and it would be very good in this context to find ways to resolve it and to ensure that there is actually an enabling framework is implemented. Yeah, it's been a very slow process. Theo, if I can come on to you and just talk a little bit about, clearly the agricultural sector it's critical and foundational for the country in terms of the fact, particularly looking at the stresses that are being experienced all around the world, where countries that are not food secure at the moment are having huge problems in relation to ensuring food security. So we're very fortunate in South Africa. And the sector is a significant contributor to jobs and GDP. And obviously is an energy user in all kinds of ways. And so maybe to talk a little bit about how you see the sector transforming to be competitive in a net zero world, and what is required to support and accelerate that process.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Joanne. So when we look at the sustainability in the agricultural sector, we typically look at the energy, water, food nexus, which I think is critical. If you have water and you have electricity, you can produce food. Of course, South Africa being, I think, the 30th driest country in the world, will eventually reach a ceiling in terms of water, for expansion. But there's no shortage of land. There's no shortage of sunlight. So I think that is critically important for the agricultural sector in terms of energy. Is grid access, and it's important for its own sustainability. You mentioned the electricity intensive carbon footprint of the sector is a real, is critically important for its own sustainability as well as, economically. We export 52% in value terms of our agricultural products, and if industry has got a heavy carbon footprint, will come under increasing pressure with, from that element as well. A third of the price of food can be attributed to transport as well, similar to the cement industry. So it really is critically important, and this is why both for security of supply as well as the transition elements, really the key I think that is required is grid access, embedded generation, self-generation, and getting the regulatory framework for wheeling correct is vitally important. Unlike perhaps some other industries, we're not, agriculture is not restricted to certain geographical areas. You'll find, where there isn't a mine, typically the anchor tenant of the small town would be an agribusiness, an agro-processor or cooperative. So there's significant potential there also, through wheeling to supply renewable energy to the local communities, to some of these small towns. But the partnerships are needed, and I like the emphasis and the approach today on partnerships, especially between business and government. But yeah, I just want to emphasize, we talk about partnerships with government, it shouldn't just be national departments. I think all three spheres of government is vitally important, and especially getting almost the unified vision for what's required for South Africa across national, provincial, and municipal sphere is vitally important to get this grid access, to at the very least get the sector energy secure, and to reduce, of course, the demand from the grid to a large extent. And then maybe just a final point, come back to Kulisu's point about employment and the just element. I think that's vitally important. Traditionally, agriculture and tourism has been seen as two of the alternatives or the future, perhaps, to absorb some of the labor from the more carbon-intensive sectors. But I do think that honest discussions with partners are needed. The one-to-one that you mentioned is very important. An agricultural job is not necessarily equivalent to a mining job. For Dlamini, it's also hard work, but most likely less income, and the ability to absorb, is probably constrained. So reskilling, absolutely important. Financing is important, and market linkages, that can all be taken care of. But I think managing expectations in that regard and having these honest discussions about what can, the potential of the sector, what can be done, but what are the constraints is very important going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Theo. I'm now going to move on to Dr. Olver, and maybe, you've heard a lot of what has been said. I think that it bears very, very directly on both the mandate of the PCC, but I think also on the way that the PCC conducts its work and builds its program and builds collaboration across society. And I wonder if you could just comment on that, but also talk a bit about the issues related to financing. And I think in particularly also in the context of this 8.55 billion offer, and I suppose the broader, what it feeds into more broadly.
Thank you, Jo. And let me add my voice of congratulations. This is one of the most important pieces of work that's going to shape our future for decades to come. And what it does is that it shows that net zero, which for most people has been this fuzzy concept, we need to get there by mid-century, but we haven't got down to the nitty-gritties of how to do it. This report shows that it's both technically feasible and affordable for us as a country to do. And in fact, we can get more bang in terms of the development and social impact and job creation that comes out of it. I think what you've done also is marshal an incredible consultative process around it. And I want to congratulate all of the business leaders that have been championing this. This is leadership. What you've done is point the path. And for us as the Climate Commission, you've basically now done our work for us. We can take your report, pack up and go home.
Not quite.
We'll send you the bill.
So what this report points to is the other great natural resource that we've got in addition to coal. And that's our renewable energy resource. And as Nolita pointed out, our green minerals. So we're also well endowed elsewhere in the mining sector. It's not all doom and gloom for mining as we go forward. And I love the focus on the industrial strategy that we need to make renewables happen. And as Lucas pointed out earlier, this is not an incremental change. It needs a national focus, national priority attention. We've got to marshal around it and with common intent, build this new energy economy. And that's how we're going to answer both the decarbonization question and the jobs and upliftment of our people that we cannot do this transition without. So a transition that isn't just will not be a transition at all. On the 8.5, I mean, just to say it's, you know, this report gives us a very useful headline number. It's a drop in the ocean compared to the 6 trillion cost of the entire transition. But it does let us get going with some catalytic interventions. And you've already mentioned them. We've got to invest in upgrading the grid. We've got to enable the transition to electric vehicles. We've got to set up the longer term hydrogen economy. And what's great about the process that the JETP office has been following is that it's highly inclusive. Mr. Manele is in the process of consulting with all of the social partners around how to compose this, and we're going to make this transition happen together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Cass, I'm going to come to you, but I thought it would be important to maybe reflect some of the issues that I've got a note from the IDC CEO, and maybe just to talk very briefly about the issues that the IDC wanted to raise, which is really focused on the implementing the commercialization strategy for green hydrogen, getting pilot projects working, and really unlocking a whole set of enablers around, firstly, the grid and the restructuring of Eskom, restructuring of the electricity tariff, also to deal with energy poverty issues, which I think are critical. And I think, Theo, you referred to that. I mean, there is a real opportunity for the kind of renewables that the private sector is wanting and starting to build to also be leveraged to support adjacent communities and to support local people in accessing energy. And I think that would be a very important part of the just transition. And also I think the IDC's concern is also about getting the planning framework sorted out so that we both have this updated IRP that Fleetwood spoke about, but also an integrated energy plan for the country that goes beyond the electricity sector. So I thought I would reflect that. And lastly, Cass, you know, BUSA is a partner in the study, and you've been instrumental in ensuring that the voice of business is incorporated in the work. I think everyone here has spoken about the critical things that they think need to happen to decarbonize the economy. Maybe if you could just talk from a business, from a BUSA perspective on what you think business, what support business needs, what business can do to support that transition.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. And let me, I'm not going to repeat what people said. I might emphasize some of the points, so let me go into it. The one thing we need to do, and when we were in Scotland for COP26, actually in Polisi, Fleetwood and I were just having a chat, and what's quite clear is that business, the private sector, has viable, bankable projects that can be turned around not in 10, 20, 30 years' time, but 3 to 5 years' time, that we can put on the table. And I think we need to robustly do that and engage with government and engage with the relevant people to actually move from the theory to implementation before the projects are there. A lot has been said about leadership. And I think that, you know, whenever I talk to business about leadership, I prefer talking to them about why they need to lead towards a different way of doing business that's also commercially sound and profitable. And I think what this report demonstrates, and I think Chippy touched on that as well, is that this isn't something that business is asked to contribute to begrudgingly. This is something that business should be going in boots and all because it makes commercial sense. And I think that we need to have that mindset, and I think business does have that mindset, and is doing it. Then I think, again, some people have talked about this. We must ensure that just transition and the move from fossil fuel-based to cleaner energy and economic growth are compatible. And that's absolutely critical. I mean, we're struggling to put our country onto a growth path. This shouldn't be taking us even further back. It must actually contribute to that. Then I think that government policy and so on has come up quite a bit, including ensuring an integrated approach. So things like zero to landfill has been mentioned, wheeling has been mentioned, our high school education system has been mentioned. And I think that business has a critical role to play to continue to engage government on these. Now, we were briefed by the president, I think it was day before yesterday, for 2.5 hours on where we are on the energy stuff and so on. And I think some of these things are being addressed. What the plan the president's team put on the table to some extent talks to what BUSA actually publicly released and what we think we should be doing. And I think that the opportunity is there for business and the presidents, under the leadership of the presidency in government, to actually put a focused group together, to actually begin to unpack these things, what resources are needed, what capacity is needed, and we need to bring the best available capacity and resources in the country together to actually make this happen. And that's what we suggested to the president the day before yesterday, and we'll follow that up. I think the other thing that business in the leadership thing has got to play a leadership role in not just the just transition debate, but the process, and this report takes you along that line. And we need to enable all stakeholders in firms and the environment in which firms work to get onto the same page on what the just transition is. But to do that, I think that we also need to ensure that we continue to build businesses' credibility across all of society. Because I think that given where the country is at the moment, I think business is going to be expected to play a critical leadership role here. And for us to play a critical leadership role in a just transition with just being in capital, we have to develop credibility across all of society. And I think that that's something we are working on and we need to continue to work on. And then just on the cement input and so on, without violating any competition legislation and so on, of which we are very careful, we need to move from competition to collaboration in a far more effective and creative way, if you like. And that's something that we need to look at. Then we talked about some of the funding needs and multilateral funding, but I think business is sending out and continues to send out the message that what we need multilateral funding for, and different types of funding, including from some of the multilateral institutions, is to also enable business and private sector funding to be leveraged into this process. And I think that the two need to work together effectively to put together different packages of finance to enable us to do different things. And I think that's important. And business also needs to, in this process, see the financing of reskilling and so on as an investment in the economy and the country. Because if we leave those people behind and we don't utilize the capacity, the inherent capacity they have, and enable them to actually play a role in the economy, we're basically where we are now. If majority of the people do not have any interest in the economy, you don't do business for too long. So I think we need to work on that. And then I think we also need to interact. I mean, a lot of our businesses, all of these sitting here, are globally connected and in the global architecture of business. And we need to interact with colleagues and people in developed economies for transfer of technology and so on, so that we can also leverage of that, and we don't reinvent the wheel. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Cass. I think everybody has had an opportunity to come in. We are almost running out of time. Is there anybody who has a burning point that they'd like to make? If not, I'm going to move. Oh, please, Fleetwood, you want to? Yeah, come in, and then I'm going to close up.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I think the point I would like to emphasize is that we've talked about collaboration and what's next. Now, let me just take one example. One thing that we cannot afford is that each company or each business around this table starts with its own Just Transition office and doing their own little four walls, come up with the brightest ideas, and we don't get the synergy through the collaboration with others to really unlock those interfaces. So I would really call upon business that we think about how to get efficiency in our process as well. Let's also look at this work, because this work has been done by feet on the ground of getting something done. So many forums that we've got in business haven't got that ability to put something tangible on the table, and therefore my plea is also that when we operationalize the Energy Council, it has all those streams. It's got a Just Transition, it's got a funding area. Let's talk in a next step here. How do we get efficiency, or rather more effectiveness in my mind, for business to really, instead of going 2 millimeters shallow into the topic, where can we go deep and get to the bottom on certain aspects and move it forward to get that unlock with government in terms of policy and regulation. So I think, my plea would be, let's fire our minds as business to get more effective. Let's enforce, not enforce, but let's promote collaboration, but let's do it tangibly. Let's get to that action point to move forward. So that's my only add.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Fleetwood. And I'm going to, in closing, try and take that forward. I think that 2 years ago, when we formed this CEO Champions grouping as a much smaller grouping at that point in time, it's grown significantly over the period of the project. We didn't really know where we would reach. So we started off on a journey. We knew what the work was that we needed to do, but I don't think we really understood the impact that we could generate with the work. And I think that has become clearer and clearer as we have walked along this path. And I think that fantastically more and more CEOs have joined, and I think commitment, both in terms of willingness to act, as well as practical action, has really moved forward in the last couple of years. And I think that I really do feel proud that this group of CEOs has been able to lead on the basis of some very, very thorough work. So I think that out of this conversation, and maybe what we should have said in the beginning is we're launching the Integrated Energy Report today. But we hopefully at the COP in Egypt in December, we will launch the report that brings all of these sectors together. So I think the cross-sectoral nature of this program has been very important, and I think it is a real opportunity space. So we are hoping that we will be able to keep this group engaged, that we will be able to look at practical action and support processes of collaboration going forward. And I think that the Just Transition is a theme that has run fundamentally through everything we've been talking about today. We've done quite a lot of work in the process of doing this work on a Just Transition, taking the PCC's Just Transition framework and saying, what does this now mean for the business community? And what is it that we need to be doing within business? What is our contribution and our role and our responsibility in relation to the Just Transition? And I certainly think, Fleetwood, picking up on what you're saying, I think it is one area where we want to embark on a much deeper consultation with companies that will hopefully lead also to some practical coordinated action on the part of business. And I'm sure, having listened to everybody, we can do it. I think, Mxolisi, with the level of humility, which is what I think some of what you were talking about in your input, that really allows us to be able to respond to both the potential of people on the ground as well as to the needs of business and the economy. So just to say that that is one of the ways that we're going to go forward. In preparing for today's roundtable, we did circulate the document, and maybe I should speak for all of the CEOs who haven't been able to attend the roundtable. We have tried to the best of our ability incorporate a wide range of comments on the document. We may not have done it perfectly, so if we haven't done it perfectly, you will excuse us. There's always room to do things better. But I think we have had overall almost unanimous endorsement. I think that there is one of the CEOs does have some reservations. The CEF has some reservations, but we are going to engage further on that. And then I think that we would also like to, beyond this, pull some of what we've talked about today into a statement that we'd like to put out with the report. And I think there has been some discussion about that. So I really, Luca, I don't know if you want to say anything before we close, but I just want to thank you very much for being here and for investing your time and your sector and your company's resources and capacities and your leadership into this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.